Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first Standards Committee of 2024. Welcome to our members of the public who are joining us either online or in person here tonight. I'd like to introduce you to the members of the committee. We have to my right, Councillor Lanovo, Councillor Connolly, Councillor Walters, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Chapman-Law, Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Haynes to my left. And also we have our Democratic Services Officer, Ms O'Callaghan, Head of Democratic Services, Mr Jones, and our Monitoring Officer, Ms Berry. So welcome everybody, and I'd like the Democratic Services Officer please to read out the housekeeping notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Standards Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of your nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way down to the surface car park at the front of the annex. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Madam Chair, would you mind if I just interrupted? You didn't introduce the independent members to the members of the public.
I was actually just about to do that, Mr Sibley. I was going to thank you for joining us tonight. We have with us Mr Ian Sibley and Mr Paul Cashmore. They are always very welcome to come as our independent members, and they give a really beneficial insight to our standards regime. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Can I ask, please, the Democratic Services Officer, do we have any apologies this evening?
No apologies for this evening. Thank you, Chair.
And do we have any substitute members, please?
We haven't received any substitute members for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to declarations of interest. Can I ask at this time if any members have any declarations of interest to make, please? No, thank you. If you do have any declarations that you feel you need to make during the meeting, just raise your hand and you can make those as we go along. We now move on to item 4, which is confirmation of the minutes. Unless anyone indicates otherwise, I will assume that the committee agrees to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October 2023 as an accurate record. Thank you. We have agreement on that, and I will sign those minutes now. Do you have them? No? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to public issues, and I would like to ask the Democratic Services Officer if there are any public issues for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've received three statements from Mr McKinstry. If you'd like to come up and... Thank you.
Okay, good evening, committee. So first statement relates to item 6, the Code of Conduct Complaints Review. Because they were reported to full council, we know the identities of the non-compliant councillors in complaints 97, 141 and 146. And we know therefore that the chair of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Bobby Dove, has had 2 bullying allegations upheld against her and failed to undertake anti-bullying training. This, in my view, is an outrageous situation, and the councillor should consider her position. It strikes me, meanwhile, that besides the annual ballot, BCP's constitution makes no provision for challenging an incumbent chair. This committee might therefore seek a constitutional amendment whereby a motion of no confidence could be brought against a chair or indeed against any committee member for code of conduct breaches and or non-compliance with sanctions. This is an excellent suggestion as it would fortify the standards regime while preserving committee autonomy. I now have two separate statements relating to the annual report, which is item 7. Statement 1. Regarding paragraph 22, is reporting non-compliance to Council having the desired effect? It could certainly do with strengthening. I well remember the shock in the public gallery last November when 3 such reports were presented to full Council. The councillors weren't named orally, debate was prohibited, and the entire business concluded in 40 seconds. This was particularly galling because Councillor Bagwell had spent over a year not apologising for disrespectful conduct. Naming councillors in the chamber, specifying breaches and incorporating those details into the minutes would prove a stronger deterrent against non-compliance and against poor behaviour generally. On the subject of chamber protocols, and this is unrelated to the above complaints, any apologies to full Council should be run past this committee first to weed out any misleading statements and to obviate tokenism. Statement 2. This is the final statement. Last year, I contacted all county, district and unitary authorities in England asking how many councillor complaints were determined in the year ending March 2023. This council's figure, 61, is the second highest among the 104 councils that replied, surpassed only by East Yorkshire District Council, East Riding of Yorkshire District Council, which had 532 complaints, although 512 related to the same incident. Hampshire Council had 26 complaints, Dorset 12, Southampton, Thameside and Bedford 0. Paragraph 24 describes BCP's significant increase in complaints as a trend, in quotes. In fact, the 61 figure relates only to the year ending March 2023, as per paragraph 10, and separate evidence suggests an astronomical decrease since then. This is clear from the papers for November's scrutiny meeting, page 31. Few complaints have been made about individual councillors since the election in May, and I wanted to place that on the Standards Committee's records this evening. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Mr. McKinsey. Can I ask the monitoring officer to please respond to the question asked? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I take on board the comments that have been made in the 3 public statements, and I do think there is merit in the Standards Committee undertaking a review of the procedures which support the Code of Conduct. In my experience, it's essential that the Standards Committee upholds the absolute highest standards of ethical governance and does ensure that all councillors here at BCP adhere to the Nolan principles, as you would expect if you stood in the shoes of the members of the public. And say for extremely exceptional circumstances, in my opinion, decisions where codes of conduct complaints have been upheld, the decisions should be placed in the public domain. They should be reported in a prominent place in the council's website, because that meets the expectations and standards of correct ethical governance. It also meets the government's expectations on people like myself, the head of paid service, the section 151 and the head of internal audit, assessing best value and the governance framework of the council. And failure to meet the demands of transparency could be seen as a significant issue for the council's annual governance statement if there are repeated concerns over time. So, Chair, in summary, as the monitoring officer, I accept I'm very new, but I do have significant experience of supporting standards committees in achieving good governance. I do feel that it would be timely for the committee to consider a review of the procedures, learn from past experiences and learn from the incidents that have been reported to you by the member of the public. It may be that you don't need to make any changes, but I do think it would be timely for the committee to just at least undertake that review to give yourselves the assurance that you have all of the mechanisms and the toolkits available to you to conduct your roles here as holding up the best standards of ethical governance to the maximum possibility that you've got without being sort of strangulated or feel that you sort of like a step short of doing the full job.
Thank you very much, Monitoring Officer. That's really, really nice to hear. We have previously asked for a review. This committee has asked for a review, so a review would be very welcome, and anything that can strengthen that and ensure that this council realises that standards does have teeth is going to be a good thing, and I'm sure that the independent persons would concur with that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Sibley, Mr. Cashmore?
Yes, I just wondered, I'm not sure whether we got an answer on the suggestion that one of the items that may be available to the Standards Committee as a vote of no confidence. I'm not sure whether that point was addressed, but in general, obviously, we support the idea that the Standards Committee has more credibility within the council administration.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cashmore, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I have nothing further to add to what Ian's already said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Hopefully, Mr. McKinsey, that also states your question. Thank you. So if we move on to item 6, oh, sorry, Councillor Armstrong, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question: when will we be undertaking a review?
Thank you. I did speak to the Monitoring Officer about this earlier, and there is going to be a need for an informal meeting shortly, and we will consider that review at the informal meeting when we meet to review any complaints that have come in over the last couple of months. Thank you. So moving on now to our first report of the evening, and that is item 6, the Code of Conduct Complaints Review. And I'd like to invite Ms. Berry, our Director of Law and Governance, our Monitoring Officer, and Mr. Richard Jones, our Head of Democratic Services, to present this item, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce the item, if that's okay. Item 6, Code of Conduct Review. It's on pages 11 to 16 in your agenda pack. This is the standard report that is now coming before the committee, so it shouldn't be a surprise for you in terms of its format. It's an opportunity to appraise members with the progress on complaints since the last meeting in October. Those complaints that were previously indicated as closed have been removed from the report. We've added the new complaints that we've had to the schedule and provided a progress update on each of the remaining complaints. So if I can just refer to through the complaints actually. So as you've already heard, complaints BCP 97, 141 and 146 were all reported to Council on the 7th of November for non-compliance, and the subject councillors were named in that report. BCP 152 we're still awaiting a response from the complainant. So we've asked for additional information from the complainant on that particular case. We normally afford around 3 months to allow additional information to come forward. So if no information is received by the 31st of January, we will write to that complainant to close that complaint. That's similar to complaint TPC a little bit further down at 011. The complainant has been requested again to supply further information, but the deadline for that one is around the 31st of March. So again, we will remind the complainant on that particular issue. BCP 158, that one's been dismissed by the monitoring officer following an initial assessment. It was not considered the councillor was acting in their capacity as a councillor, and there was insufficient evidence to actually warrant the investigation. We did follow up on a number of points with the service relating to that, but there was no evidence to support and warrant that complaint. BCP 157 has been referred to the subject member as detailed in the report. The deadline for that one is the 22nd of January. And since the publication of the agenda, BCP 159, 160 and TPC 012 have now been reviewed by the monitoring officer as part of that initial assessment, and the subject councillors have been asked for their comments in response. The response deadline for those is the 29th of January. As a consequence, we will need, as you just alluded to, Chair, we will need to schedule a Chair's consultation meeting in early or mid-February to consider those complaints. That will allow us sufficient time to collate the responses, send out the notice for the meeting sufficiently for you to read the details, and then convene the meeting and then consider the complaints. The report's for noting, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Are there any questions of the officer, please? Yes, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard, for providing this report. It's just a point really where you're talking about timeframes for deadlines for responses. Is it possible to include that in the reports going forward?
Absolutely, we can add that. I've added in, for instance, the date that a new complaint was received. That was added in, but we can give it a little bit more information on that one where we have that. Just to remind you, in terms of the procedure, 14 days is allowed for subject members to respond to a complaint.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the officers? Do our independent persons have any questions of the officers at this stage, please?
If Paul doesn't mind, certainly not from me, except again to reiterate the thanks that we give to the officers for the work that they do in bringing things forward.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Sibley. I think that we, as a committee, will reiterate that as well. Councillor Oliver Waters, sorry.
One question was the 3 months for extra information. What was our justification for having that in the kind of code of conduct that we give them those 3 months? It seems like a long time. I'm not suggesting that we change it right now. I'm just saying that we might be worth discussing in future.
Again, Councillor Waters, that's again just the tradition that we've typically given to members. I do take the point that is quite a lengthy period when we're trying to speed up the process. It does allow us to perhaps close complaints or at least encourage evidence to be supplied to us. But I think perhaps that can be included as part of the review.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Conner.
It notes on paragraph 8 that there'll be a delay in progressing some complaints during the transition between monitoring officers. So I just wanted to find out how much of an issue that is and whether there'll be a backlog as a result of that.
To be fair, thankfully during that period there weren't too many complaints, but it was agreed with the director and chief executive that actually to cover the work that something had to give, and code of conduct complaints were those. There were only, I think, 2 complaints during that period, so it's impacted on 2 complaints, but they have been informed in terms of the process.
Any further questions at this stage? No. Any debate? No. Okay, so the recommendation is that the outcome of the concluded complaints and the progress of those still outstanding be noted. Do I have a proposer for that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Waters. All those in favour? Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we will move on now to our second and final item of the evening, our second and final report of the evening, which is the annual report on the Code of Conduct complaints. And again, I'd like to invite our monitoring officer and our head of democratic services to present this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So item 7, again, refer members to pages 17 to 22 of the agenda pack. Before I start, obviously there's a little bit of preamble in terms of the role of standards, and this is the annual report being brought to you. But I'd like to just put on record effectively the thanks to our independent persons in supporting this process, 2 of which are on the call today. We are required to appoint at least 1 independent person. We have 3, and they play an active role in engaging with us during the process of consideration of complaints. So again, just to thank on behalf of the committee and monitoring officer our appreciation to the IPs. The report itself is a statistical report. It provides some data, and obviously we've rolled forward the data from previous years. So this now covers the periods from 2019-20 through to 2022-23. I'll refer probably to members first of all to the table at the top of page 19, which is the total number of complaints. And we have seen a steady increase, I'll be honest, since 2019, where it doubled in 21-22, and it's gone a further, doubled from the original 2019-20 figures. We've seen a further 80% increase in 22-23, and now at 3.6 times the original figures. It was alluded to earlier on around the number of complaints in the start of 23-24, and I think it's probably worth just highlighting that. That was clearly, we've started with quite a number of new councillors. Almost half of our councillors are brand new, and therefore you're finding those councillors are finding their feet effectively. So I'm not surprised there's been a decline in that, and I think maybe we need to keep that momentum and promote some of those the positive working through that. We have clearly also delivered code of conduct training through the induction processes and so on. So I think that's probably the reason for that statement that was referenced, and I hope that we can maintain that number down, because it is very resource intensive in terms of managing complaints. I'll then refer to paragraph 16 if I can, and obviously there's any questions members can ask at the end. Paragraph 16 then talks around the source of complaints of the behavioural activity. And previously we saw quite a rise in social media related complaints. That's actually significantly dropped off. We have delivered training in the previous year, and obviously we delivered some further training in terms of the induction sessions. So that's positive in terms of a significant decline, but conversely, the source appears to now be by email, which is accounted for quite a significant rise. And in other, and just to clarify for other, the predominant, so I list there of typical examples of other, but most of those in other in that particular year were relating to committee decisions and committee debate related items. So that's the section 16. I'll then refer to paragraph 18. So this is the table that flows from pages 19 through to page 20. And we ask complainants to indicate what part of the code of conduct the councillor is considered to have breached in their complaint. And again, fairly consistently with previous years, the top categories are failing to treat others with respect, and bringing the office of councillor or the council into disrepute are the two primary reasons cited by complainants. Paragraph 19 then talks around the outcomes. So again, as you will have obviously considered a lot of these complaints through the informal meeting, the vast majority of complaints are dismissed with no breach of code of conduct identified. However, any expression, any complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction, is labour intensive, can impact on the reputation of the council, and we should seek to minimise the number of complaints in the first instance, rather than seeing the number that is dismissed as a positive. I wouldn't necessarily see that as a positive. We've got to start to reduce the number of complaints from the outset. 2 complaints were referred in that year 2022-23 to council for non-compliance, which was introduced in 21-22 to encourage compliance, but the committee again may wish to consider whether the benefits of that is really being, or the outcome is being realised. It was the ambition when that was introduced was to encourage councillors to comply with the informal resolutions, and again, as part of that workshop that we're going to have, that maybe that can be an issue to consider. Members, the report is asking members to review the report and to identify any areas of work for inclusion in the committee's work programme, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for that report and for your for the thorough work that's gone into it as well. Some of those figures are quite shocking. As you say, any complaint received, especially when the complaints are being received by members of the public, it does impact on our reputation. And I'm very pleased that this year we are aware as a committee that there have been far fewer complaints so far, and let's keep up that good work. Members, are there any questions for the officer, please? Councillor Connolly and then Councillor Armstrong, thank you.
Paragraph 15, the table showing by complainant type. What is other in that context? There's just one this year.
Yeah, that to be fair, is a member of the public, but they are representing an organisation. So I just wanted to clarify that was slightly different. They're still an individual, so they are still protected, if you like, under the Act. So we wouldn't want to divulge where that organisation was from, but it was a slightly different one from just being a resident.
Councillor Armstrong, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's with regards to paragraph 15, to the complainant type on members of the public. It's really interesting to see that those numbers, how much they've increased, particularly in those two latter years. Do any of the officers, do we know why that is? Is it down to ease of reporting? Is it down to poor behaviour from councillors? Or is it down to just a couple of disgruntled people who are making lots of complaints? But I would like to acknowledge members of the public actually for engaging in this process, because I think that's really positive, but I would like to understand a bit more around those figures.
Yes, I totally agree. It's seeing members of the public feeling so adamantly about the behaviour of councillors, whether it is a breach or not, is it impacts on our council, it impacts on our reputation. But yeah, perhaps Richard could come in and just clarify that, please.
Yeah, we certainly haven't gone out to publicise. I think the complaints process is quite open. There is a section on the website, and the code of conduct refers to the complaints, and there are links from our code of conduct to the complaints process. But that hasn't changed dramatically, so I don't think that's the cause of any increase in that sense. Some complaints have relate to the same incident. So when a major issue occurs, we've had a number of complaints during those 2 years that have identified the same subject councillor relating to the same matter. Not as many as Mr. McKinstry referenced for one authority, but that certainly has come in some chunks. I think we previously had quite a few complaints relating to social media activity, so that was a bit of a push from that point of view. But I think for last year, it's probably the pre-election year that is politically quite sensitive last year, and I think there are a number of issues that were raising concerns during the last year's during that 22-23 period.
I think it's interesting because I can remember that, you know, there was lots of talk at the time about how it was tit for tat and councillor on councillor, but actually that doesn't show in these figures. It really wasn't. It was that our public who were so concerned about behaviour, and there's certainly lessons to be learnt from that, and I hope that we can take that forward through this term, and especially in the run up, you know, in 3 years' time to another election, that we don't actually end up in this situation again. And hopefully if standards is strengthened, you know, we can ensure that we mitigate against that as much as possible. Are there any other questions? Yes, sorry, can I just go back to Richard on this? Thank you.
Just on that one point you just raised around councillor on councillor. So we introduced that division and that split because I think it actually fell at the end of the 2020-21 and the start of the 21-22 period, where we had the 8 complaints came in quite a short period on councillor complaints. So we introduced that stat, but I was quite encouraged actually when I saw that actually for the whole of the year in 22-23, that was back down to 3.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, Councillor Navarro.
I was just wondering how actually Democratic Services copes with the extra workload when you go from, you know, actually doubling your workload from one year to the next.
The Chair, if I may, actually this work more falls on the shoulders personally of myself and Richard in our capacities as Deputy Monitoring Officer and Monitoring Officer. So that's part of our reasoning is to ensure that everybody involved in the process is assured confidentiality. So we are very careful about who knows what and when, and because it's not fair on, say, colleagues such as Sinead to know something and we don't want anybody's work being affected. So this is really a personal responsibility that Richard and I take on. And obviously we work with yourselves as well, but our main purpose is to ensure confidentiality from the outset of receiving a complaint, because the last thing that we need is, say, trial by jury. If we have to gather evidence as part of either the initial fact-finding stage or it goes to investigation, we need everybody to have the right of natural justice, which is a fair opportunity to put their case forward and either speak to yourselves if it comes to that, or provide evidence to us without them feeling everybody's made a predetermined decision. So we purposely keep it to ourselves. We will consult with the chair of Standards Committee. Sorry if I'm stepping out of line. I would normally, as a monitoring officer, consult with the chair of Standards Committee if there is exceptional circumstances, which means Richard and I have considered it. We need to go to X or Y because it's either extremely complex. We have the risk of being conflicted in our day jobs. And so there's always a circumstance where I would need to perhaps just inform chair of standards or who chair of standards advises me that I need to speak to, because I'm still learning the constitution at the moment, but it is on our shoulders, so it's a personal responsibility.
Are there any other questions for officers at this stage? Yes, Councillor Conley.
More of a follow-up. So paragraph 22 mentions about the procedure to identify subject councillors at full council. So the committee may wish to consider whether this approach is having the desired outcome. So I just wanted to check that that is what we'll be looking at as part of the review that we were talking about earlier, if that's within scope of that review.
Monitoring officer, can you confirm?
Chair, yes, I would like that to fall within the remit of the review. I would also like a catch-all element to the agenda so that if you've got ideas or independent persons have got ideas, they can be shared in as part of that review. So I don't want it to be restricting. And if I may, Chair, that also includes about the premise of future annual reports and the status that they have amongst the council. So this is a really valuable report, but I'm also, as a monitoring officer, going to ask the Standards Committee as part of its review to consider what happens to the annual report from the Standards Committee. Who is our audience? Do we promote ourselves or yourselves widely enough, for example? So, for example, you may want to report your annual report to full council going forward, and sitting alongside audit committee who may want to do an annual report as well, because it is a key element of the governance framework for the council as far as I'm concerned. So I hope you don't mind, Chair, but that is a suggestion I would personally, as the monitoring officer, like to put forward to the review meeting when it happens.
Thank you very much for members of the public watching at home. There were lots of nodding going on around the committee members with those suggestions, and I think that would be very welcome. Independent persons, do you have any questions of the officer at this stage, please?
Not from me, no, thank you.
Not from me, Chair, but thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you, Mr. Sibley. Councillor Armstrong, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to make a final point with regards to point 24 on the conclusion, and just making that correlation between the increasing complaints, councillor behaviour, and how, if the trend continues, the potential impact on resources and you know, additional funding, etc., that's needed to support that. So I think it's really, yeah, a call to all of us, like reminder to all of us as councillors to be operating with the best standards that we can.
Absolutely, yes. I completely agree. And perhaps I could ask Richard if you could assure the members of the committee and also the members of the public that are watching tonight that we are in no way in the same kind of numbers this year so far as we were reported last year. There has been a significant reduction in the number of complaints coming in. Do you actually have the number of complaints that we've had so far this year? Sorry to put you on the spot. I know that from the previous report, but there were 2 that were actually reported in the previous year from that. So I think it will be that minus those 2.
Again, don't quote me on these numbers because I'm literally looking at the data at the moment. So I believe we have 7 concluded in 23-24 and 3 further pending. God, that's 4 further pending now, actually, because one hasn't been updated. So around those sorts of numbers at this stage. And obviously we're a long way into the year already. So I just wanted to also cover that particular point. This annual report is late. So it was reported last time that it wasn't on the agenda. So it will be more timely following the end of this current year. So we are significantly lower, but again, don't hold me on those numbers, but they're around that.
No, thank you. We'll take it as a guesstimate. But it is encouraging that we are seeing a much lower number, and long may that continue. So we have a recommendation here, which is that the annual report on the Code of Conduct complaints be reviewed and any further work be identified for inclusion in the work programme. I'd actually like to propose from the chair that we note the report, but furthermore that we agree that a review of standard procedures be commenced as soon as possible. I'd like to formalise this, aiming for implementation for the new municipal year. And finally, that we formally offer our thanks to the independent persons for their work and support on Standards Committee so far this year, and for previous years as well, to you both. So I'm proposing that from the chair. Does everybody do I have a seconder, please? Yes, Councillor Waters, thank you. Is everybody in agreement with that? Can I have a show of hands, please? That's lovely. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you to our
confidence, Chair.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Sibley, and Mr. Cashmore as well. So thank you very much to our members, to our officers, and to those of you at home and in our committee room tonight. We are now drawing this meeting to a close. Thank you very much.